Today we're continuing on in our series, and today we're going to be taking a look at disaster, because disaster is something that we've all experienced together, is something that we all have in common to one degree or another. And so we're going to look at the life of Naomi, because Naomi was the one that we see in this particular story. Okay, you're going to have to do it from there. There you go. I may have to go over and go now or something, but Naomi is the one that we see whose life really fell apart. Her husband and she and her two sons moved to a foreign country when things were going bad in the way of their land. There was not enough food, and so they went to a place where there was food. The two sons found wives. Things were going great until Naomi's husband died. And then a little bit later, both of her sons died. And there she was in a foreign country with her two daughter-in-laws and no way of being able to take care of herself. And so I think most folks would probably say, yes, that was definitely a disaster in Naomi's life. Now, disasters are important for us to look at in certain ways. We all have what's called a world view. It's the way we look at things in this life. It's the way that we explain why things happen. It's what helps us to make sense of everything that's going around us. And of course, Naomi had a world view as well. What she said in the scripture, if you heard, was that basically, my God has made this to happen to me, which was pretty much the worldview of every Hebrew person back in those days. If things were going great, God was blessing us, and if things were going bad, God was not blessing us. And so there was the worldview that God was the one in charge of it all. And yet, in spite of all of this, we see that her life was not based upon herself. She didn't look at herself as being the one who was center of the universe. And yet so many people today have worldviews that are very self-serving. They're very self-centered. Let me give you an illustration of one. If a person has the worldview at the beginning as a young person that everybody is a good person, and maybe you had that worldview at one point in time, or maybe you still have that worldview, I don't know. But if somebody hurts you, then you have to stop and rethink about your worldview. Well, is my worldview still right? It was just that one fluke person? Or do I need to maybe change my worldview? And the more open we are to folks and the more we get hurt, it's very easy for a person to get to the place to where their worldview now becomes, I cannot trust anybody. See how those worldviews work? It's the way that we explain the things that are going on around us. Now, if I were self-serving, it would be something that I would want. And I would want everybody to love me. I would want everybody to think the best of me. But if that doesn't happen, then my worldview may become, well, everybody else just doesn't know what they're missing. You ever known anybody that had that worldview? I really am good, and if you don't like me, well, you just don't know what you're missing. That's a worldview that people take. Let's take, though, a look at some of these destructive things that we can have, if you would. The disaster worldviews that are self-serving. The first one I want to look at is that nothing will happen to me if I'm a Christian. So many people who become Christians have that worldview, that everything's going to be just fine. That since I am now a Christian, God is watching out over me, and everything in my life is going to go great. And then something bad happens, and we have to rethink our worldview. And then something else bad happens, and we have to start thinking about maybe my worldview isn't correct, and we get to maybe one of three of these worldviews. Number one, God isn't protecting me, and so either God doesn't care about me, which a lot of people in this world have, or they might think that God really just isn't involved in creation at all. God started this creation, and he went off somewhere, and he isn't protecting me. He's just not involved in this world at all. Those are worldviews that you'll hear every day from people that are not in church. You'll even hear some of those from people who are in church. Here's another way that it might go. Well, God can't protect me. Therefore, God must not be real. If God cannot protect me from all of these bad things, then maybe God just isn't real at all. And people wander away from their faith. But it could be this. It could be that a person says, well, you know, my worldview is wrong. God hasn't changed. It's just the way that I perceive God. Maybe I am still vulnerable to the creation and all of the other things that go on around me, but it's God who helps me through. You see, now there's a new way of looking at how things work. But a lot of people who begin their life as a Christian, or who begin their Christian walk, most times, more times than not, have that idea that nothing's going to happen to me now that I'm one of God's chosen. Another worldview is that nothing will happen to me if I choose correctly. Now that's one of the things that people in the world love to have. It's all on me. If I make the right decisions, everything is going to happen fine. If I make the right investments in the stock market, then I'm going to do well. If I make the right choice of which home I'm going to buy, then everything will do fine. Unfortunately, there are things outside of our choices that influence our life. But those people that have that idea that if I choose correctly, everything will be fine, they are the ones who feel like they are the masters of their own fate. Everything is in my hands, and therefore God is probably irrelevant to them. Doesn't matter whether God's there or not. I just don't think that God's an issue in my life, because I'm the one that's in charge. I'm the one making decisions for myself. And if I choose correctly, life will be good. Now, there are those who are Christians that also have this concept, this worldview. And the way that they look at it is, I have to learn the way that the world works. I've got to learn the rules that will help me make the right choices. And God's wisdom, as I find it in the Bible, is one way that I can learn to make better decisions. So it's still all about, if I choose correctly, life is going to be fine. And that worldview oftentimes, more times than not, lets us down. The other worldview that is pretty disastrous to us is that it's always someone's fault. You have that worldview, it's always somebody's fault. Everything that happens has got to be because of something else, somebody else. It's human nature for us to think that way. So if there is an automobile accident, then whose fault is it? That's the first thing we ask. Well, was it the person that was driving the wrong way down the street? Probably their fault, yeah. Or maybe the person that had had too much to drink? Probably their fault, yes. We are a great people for blaming others, for placing fault on folks. And that way we can wrap up our understanding in a nice little package and put a bow on top and say, it was his fault. It was her fault. But then there are these things that happen. Things like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires. Who can we blame those on? Well, I was embarrassed to say that when the hurricane came in and devastated Haiti, that there were some Christians on the television saying it was the Haitians' fault because they were so much into voodoo and black magic that God came and brought his wrath against them. I just had to shake my head on that one. You know, we go too far in trying to find out who's the one that is at fault so that we can place the blame. And yet, most of the time, it's just a natural disaster. They happen, they occur, and for us to place the blame on God for those things to happen, I believe for us as Christians is demeaning God. And yet I understand where they're coming from. They are people who want to look at the law, and the law says, and therefore it must be these people that are wrong because the law says. Now, I don't say that God cannot bring natural disaster. He has definitely done that in Scripture before. But I do not say that every natural disaster, nor most natural disasters, are things that God brings as a way of punishment to people. So how do you decide who's at fault? How do you decide what natural disasters, why they occur, whose fault they are, if anything? Naomi did have a worldview. Naomi's life was a response to the disaster that she had in her life. And she said in the Word that it was God that had caused that. But I want you to look at Naomi's story, because Naomi's story indicates that she was a very gracious person.